The murder of 6-year-old Jonbenet Ramsey captivated the nation and put her family under the microscope, with many speculating that her father, mother, brother, or all three were involved in her killing. Tonight, her brother Burke speaks after 20 years of silence about that painful saga, and new evidence is brought to light. Here's my Nightline co-anchor, Juju Chang.
I remember the casket was small and her eyes were closed. I think one of her eyes was a little bit like droopy or something. I thought that was weird.
How did you feel seeing her?
A lot of sadness. I don't think I really fully grasped, like, after this, I won't see her again.
Burke Ramsey, now 29, breaking a 20-year silence, coming out of the shadows to speak publicly for the first time about his sister Jonbenet's murder in an interview with Dr. Phil.
The next thing I remember, my dad came and told me Jonbenet is in heaven now, and he started crying. Then I started crying.
He was just 9 when his little sister was found viciously strangled in the basement of their own home. The child beauty queen, eternally 6 years old, whose gruesome, unsolved murder became America's fixation. Two competing theories lingered for years. Did an intruder break in and kill? Or were the Ramseys themselves somehow responsible? Burke, who was reportedly paid for the interview, is the only family member in the house the night of the murder who's never come forward with his side of the story.
Did you hit your sister over the head with a baseball bat or a flashlight?
Absolutely not.
Burke says he stayed in bed for hours as dozens of investigators and loved ones swarmed the house.
Critics would say you weren't curious because you already knew. He didn't have to get up and go check because he knew exactly what had happened.
I mean, I didn't know if there was some bad guy downstairs and my dad was chasing off with a gun.
Everyone looks at the interview of Burke and thinks, why is this young man smiling?
I don't see a smile as much as I see an uncomfortable facial expression. But I don't see that as smile, happy smile. I see that as uncomfortable guy.
ABC's chief legal analyst Dan Abrams spent years covering the saga.
Burke Ramsey's been one of the most sought-after interviews by every news and tabloid organization out there, because back at the time, people were saying, oh, maybe Burke did it, or what does Burke know?
At the time, the incessant media attention smothered the family under a cloud of suspicion. Then 9-year-old Burke was not immune. Years later, John Ramsey, Jonbenet and Burke's father, told me that they were simply trying to protect their 9-year-old from the media onslaught.
There was one day when he and Patsy managed to escape the paparazzi, and they made it to a grocery store, and there was a headline that Burke...
Brother did it.
And he burst into tears.
Yeah,
well, what was his reaction?
Well, Burke's a very quiet, private person. We tried very hard to keep Burke's life normal, and that just was like a huge interruption to that.
The mystery began the morning after Christmas 20 years ago with a horrifying ransom note left in the Ramsey home, demanding $118,000 in exchange for the safe return of their little girl.
What's going on there, ma'am? We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please explain to me what's going on, okay? There's a note left in our daughter's door.
But soon, John Ramsey, Jonbenet's father, found her lifeless body in the basement, a moment he told me about in 2012.
When I found her, it was a rush of relief. And then, of course, within moments, I realized that she probably was dead. But she was back in my arms.
The family home, hours after the discovery, captured in these crime scene videos, seen for the first time in an investigation Discovery docuseries airing this week. Jonbenet had been strangled with a garrote, her skull fractured, and there were signs of sexual abuse. At first, investigators found no apparent signs of a break-in, and the Ramsey family came under the investigative microscope. Burke, too, placed under the harsh lights of the interrogation room.
When was the last time you saw Jonbenet alive?
As seen in these newly discovered tapes of police interviews, included in an A&E documentary, the theory was that Burke killed her accidentally, and the family was covering up the crime. Inside the Ramsey home, a flashlight, heavy enough to be a murder weapon. The strangulation device made from the broken handle of Patsy's paintbrush. The bizarre ransom note was found to have been written on Patsy's notepad.
The ransom note is the single most important piece of evidence that led the authorities to think it had to be someone in the house.
i.e. John and Patsy Ramsey.
Because who else would have the time, they would say, to write that intricate note and practice it beforehand, other than someone trying to cover up a crime?
The police play hardball, bluffing about the evidence they have.
We have trace evidence that appears to link you to the death of Jonbenet. What would you tell me?
But Patsy never wavered, always adamant about their innocence.
Go back to the damn drawing board. I didn't do it. John Ramsey didn't do it, and we didn't have a clue of anybody who did do it.
Outside the Ramseys' home, a constant crush of cameras.
Looking back on it, it looks like madness. But at the time, we were so crushed by the loss of our child that it didn't matter.
John and Patsy Ramsey were never charged with the crime, but were nonetheless skewered in the court of public opinion.
This is the first time that you've sat for an extended interview.
They eventually tried to set the record straight with Barbara Walters.
Mr. Ramsey, did you kill Jonbenet?
No, I did not.
Mrs. Ramsey, did you kill your daughter?
No, I did not kill my daughter.
But if not the Ramseys, then who did it?
Jonbenet was a pedophile's dream come true.
Lou Smith, the late detective who was brought in by the Boulder District Attorney's Office to conduct an independent investigation, believed a sexual predator killed Jonbenet.
I believe he brought her down to the farthest, deepest part of that basement and did very brutal things to her.
Smith uncovered evidence that had reportedly been overlooked by the Boulder police. A broken window where the killer could have entered. A footprint. Marks on Jonbenet, indicative of a stun gun.
That was a little parade in Charlevoix.
When I spoke to John Ramsey in 2012, he had a lingering sense of regret. Child beauty pageants made him uncomfortable, and he told me if he had another chance, he wouldn't let Jonbenet compete publicly.
Were you naive about letting her compete in pageants?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
But your lesson was, what if we inadvertently exposed her to the killer?
Obviously, you don't want to keep him locked in the house, but it's just an awareness. Not everyone around you is a nice, good person.
A re-examination of the DNA evidence using new technology found an unidentified male's DNA on Jonbenet's underpants, essentially clearing the Ramsey family.
This is the only case where I think I have fundamentally turned as much as I have, thinking probably to no way over the course of an intense investigation.
The new district attorney, Mary Lacey, took the extraordinary step of formally exonerating the Ramseys. But vindication didn't come soon enough for the Ramseys. Patsy died from ovarian cancer in 2006. Today, John is remarried and lives a quiet life in Michigan.
I struggled a lot with forgiveness and what that meant. The first phase was, I can't forgive this creature. Let me get my hands on him. We won't need a trial.
Well, no one would blame you for being angry and bitter.
And I was for a time, absolutely. But you can't stay there, and because it's damaging to you as a person. It's a gift you give yourself to let it go.
As for Burke, he's now a software engineer and once again back in the headlines.
It's sort of surprising that Burke gave up his anonymity.
And I think in retrospect, it was probably a mistake. I don't think he came across that well, even though he's totally innocent.
And yet 20 years later, Jonbenet's case, still an unsolved murder. The Boulder police chief releasing this video statement.
We remain focused on this investigation and finding justice for Jonbenet.
Her murder remains America's great whodunit mystery, still haunting the public imagination.
The notion that these rich parents might have killed their child was an amazing question / soap opera / mystery.
And it was a true unsolved mystery to this day.
And it will never be solved.
For Nightline, I'm Juju Chang in New York.